Now we're on touch screen. We've come into the classroom, so we're going to learn. Okay, so you know the history of Libya. It's one of the old states. Was it really colonized? Most likely not particularly colonized. In the big period of colonization before the First World War, Libya was a monarchy. It was controlled by a man called King Idris. King Idris led Libya throughout the process of 1950s and then 60s. Sometime in the mid to late 60s, emerged a captain in the military of Libya, Captain Gaddafi he was called, and he overthrew the monarchy of King Idris. King Idris was in some oil politics against the West, and he was beginning to be on the wrong side of the West. It is largely believed by political scientists that the West propelled Captain Gaddafi to power. Gaddafi came to power in the mid to late 60s in Libya and ruled Libya until the Arab Spring. Colonel Gaddafi ruled with an iron hand. Initially, he was very popular. He was cast in the mold of Che Guevara, a freedom fighter, a left-wing thinker. He mobilized the military, mobilized Libya, and he did great for Libya in terms of development. Social construction was big. The desert was turned into normal land, artificial sources of water. Libya became a great country. Their health issues were great. Colonel Gaddafi, however, was short of democracy. There was no democracy in Libya. People could not speak their mind, and people could not even speak any other language apart from Arabic. Television decided what people should see. There was absolutely no private media, and as they used to call him, the Libyan leader. So he metamorphosed from Colonel Gaddafi to the Libyan leader to the great African. Eventually, the Arab Spring, which began in Tunisia with a call of youth unemployment, you know the famous case of Bouazizi, that touched all over the Arab world. It is believed that the West went into Libya to remove Colonel Gaddafi because Gaddafi was articulating new positions, new models of economic calculations in the world relating to currency, etc., etc. It's also believed that he was arrested by French troops and handed over to the Libyan rebels. So the remnants of Colonel Idris, the man that Gaddafi overthrew, and other political opponents formed the new opposition in Libya that led the overthrow. And after that, Libya has been in chaos. Let's now go on to the touchscreen and speak to Alhassan Bello. So take it up from where I ended. So by the time the Arab Spring thrust into Libya, it ended with Gaddafi dead. Who was the government?
There was an interim government headed by former Chief Justice Jalil.
Chief Justice under Gaddafi?
Yeah. No, some of these officials defected. But then I still find it difficult that they defected because they have their new convention for democracy. It's more like they defected because they wanted to save themselves. But then the election was conducted. So you have an Islamist-dominated parliament, that is the General National Congress. They were in charge, but there was this division and disagreement among the political factions. Moreover, there was a collapse of state institutions after the overthrow of Gaddafi. So it was this competition for resources and influence. So that was the 2012 election. Then in 2014, there was another election which marked the beginning of the current divisions because the old Islamist-dominated General National Congress.
So it was an election in 2012.
Yeah.
Who won?
That was what resulted in the Islamist-dominated parties coming into office.
Was it under those circumstances that the American ambassador was executed?
No, that was in Benghazi.
That was in Benghazi.
Yeah.
And that had nothing to do with the election?
That was post that era, when the division surfaced.
So the Islamists won the election?
Yeah, the Islamists, in quotes, because I'm very careful of
Was it an election that produces a prime minister or produces a president?
Yeah, they adopted a parliamentary system rather.
Okay.
So they had a prime minister and they had a presidential council.
Okay.
But then there was an attempt towards nation building. But then when in 2014 the election came into being.
Another election in 2014?
Yeah, 2014.
Okay.
The former Islamist-dominated parliament party lost and performed very woefully. But then they disagreed with the outcome of the election. So they took the case to the Supreme Court, which passed a verdict that was in their favor. And then the newly elected members also felt that verdict was passed under duress because the court was not independent. And that's a testament to the fact that state institutions collapsed and there was this jostling for influence. So there was violence in Tripoli. And then the newly elected members moved to the east, Tobruk precisely. And then the old, members also stayed in the west. But then that also...
So now you had two parliaments?
You had two governments.
In Tripoli and Benghazi?
In Benghazi. But that...
Which one was the stronger one? Where was the American embassy? Tripoli or Benghazi?
American consulate rather was what was attacked in Benghazi.
Okay, so the embassy was in Tripoli.
Due to the chaos, a lot of Western officials were taken out.
Okay.
So there was just little presence in Libya at that time. But you see, to understand, so that also created an historical division. Then we need to go back to how the modern Libya came into being.
I have to reduce it. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Better?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a historic map of
Okay.
Libya. These are historic regions.
Okay, so all this is modern day Libya?
This is the total landmass of modern day Libya.
Okay.
But these are historic divisions that have always dominated Libyan politics. By 1551, somewhere around 1551 AD, the Ottoman Turks were able to conquer Libya.
The Turkish Ottoman?
Yeah, Ottoman Empire. But not in its entirety. They were rather in control of this portion, the Tripolitania.
Okay.
But then, just like any other empire, at the fringes, the rule tend to be nominal rather than absolute, whereby there are local actors involved. So somewhere around 1711, there was a local actor, Ahmed Karmali, who took over control. So Ottoman rule was nominal within that period. But then you see, whilst the Turkish were in control of the coast, at the interior of the country itself, he also has some nominal control. But there was a local actor at that point, the Sanusi order, founded by Ahmad Sanusi. So he also felt that Islam was not really being, what do you call it? Recognized or pursued fully. So he also attempted to build a state out of the chaos. So he also started a Sufi order, the Sanusiya order, which is dominant in this portion.
Why do you call that portion that?
Cyrenaica.
Cyrenaica. Is it an Islamic name?
No, I think it has its origin from Rome, the Latins.
Okay.
You know, the Roman, you see, due to the proximity of the northern African coast to the Mediterranean, they've been influence of Greek, the Romans, conquest, prior to the...
And Spain, I guess.
Yeah, prior to the Islamic conquest of North Africa, the Romans were there, the Greeks were there, so some of these words have a bit of French origin. But then, around 1911, you know, the Italians and the Germans joined the scramble for Africa very late. So they were also looking for just small pieces of portions left to take. So Italy was able to carve out Libya out of Ottoman Empire. So it divided this part. So Italian influence was more stronger in Cyrenaica. But then...
Which is present day, which Benghazi?
Benghazi.
Okay.
And then Tripolitania, which is present day Tripoli, actually got its name for the Turkish word. Tabrusul Garb. Tripoli in the east. That's what the Turkish were calling it.
Okay.
But you see...
Tripoli in the east. Were they calling that because of Tripoli in Lebanon?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So the Ottoman rule had two Tripolis.
One in Lebanon, one in Libya.
So that was the Tripoli in the west.
Tripoli in the west.
This was Tripoli in the east.
Okay.
But you see, when... So here has a bit of, what do you call it, Ottoman influence and Islamic influence.
Okay.
Italians also had enjoying absolute more control here than this side. But then, when Italy came, whilst Ottoman Empire was not able to mount effective resistance, because of the series of work and influence of the Sanusi Sufi order, you know, it's both a religious and a political entity, they offered the most strongest resilience and resistance to the Italian occupation. And I think the war almost lasted for 2 decades or more. And this was the leader of the revolt.
This is Omar Mukhtar.
Omar al-Mukhtar.
Yes. He's by legend connected to Gaddafi as his great-grandfather.
That's just
it's legend. It's legend, yes. But this is Omar Mukhtar, who fought in the war against the Italians.
Yeah, for 20 years.
There was a film made by Reuters way back entitled Omar Mukhtar.
Line of Desert.
Yes.
And then this is the Italian, one of the Italian
generals.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Pietro Badoglio.
So is this a reconciliation photograph or what?
You know, during the fight.
Is this Omar Mukhtar?
This is Omar Mukhtar.
Okay.
There were a series
Is that his son?
No, these are some of his fighters.
Okay.
There was several attempts to actually bribe him.
Mukhtar?
Yeah.
To release the territory?
To stop fighting the Italians. Because he was very effective in killing them. He really resisted.
Yeah.
So there was a series of, and one of his famous quotes that became very popular was when he told the Italians that we will never surrender. We win or we die. As in the next generation will fight. So he refused to be bought. But another very important aspect about this man was, even when he was fighting, he still observed human rights protocol.
By doing what?
Whilst the Italians were using chemical weapons and killing innocent civilians, he followed the Islamic precept set by the Prophet that you don't harm anybody. You know, when they were going to the first Battle of Badr, one of the instructions the Prophet gave the companion was that aged people shouldn't be attacked, the helpless, children, women, including plants.
I see.
So human rights is actually not a foreign, what do you call it?
It's not a Western philosophy.
It's a philosophy. When
it's
it comes
ingrained in Islam
in
already.
Islam itself. And that was what he was following. So he was asked, why don't you treat the Italians bad? And when he said, we don't kill prisoners. We follow. His fellow warrior said, they do it to us. And Umar replied, they are not our teachers.
I see.
But it was because of Umar Mukhtar and Sanusiya resistance. That was how come King Idris was given the throne. Because he's a descendant of the founder of the Sanusiya Sufi order.
Okay.
But because they offered the strongest resistance to the Italians. But then you see, when he came to power, the kingdom had some trappings of democracy. There were initially 3 regions. Each region had its own regional assembly.
Like a federal system.
Yeah, a federal system.
Yeah.
Because there was this populational, what do you call it, differences. Whilst Sri Lanka is bigger than this side, but then Tripolitania has more population than Sri Lanka. And you see, when Gaddafi came to power, there's a reason why the revolt started in the east. When Gaddafi came to power, he confirmed he was like a manifestation of the Easterners' fear. The Easterners have always feared that a united Libya will be dominated by the West because of its population.
Ah, okay.
So when Gaddafi overthrew the King Idris, mind you, King Idris is from the East, and then dissolved the institutions or the little features of democracy there.
So Gaddafi converted it from a federal state to a unitary state, under his control, as the executive.
And that also confirmed the fear of the Easterners. So, you know, when the protest started.
But Gaddafi was in power for more than 20 years?
Yeah.
30 years, maybe?
You see, when he came to power.
Did the resistance sustain its interest for all that 3 decades of Gaddafi's leadership?
Gaddafi is a master of playing one group against the other. He played it very effectively. You know, at a certain point in time, Gaddafi was a pan-Arabist, a disciple of Gamal Abdel Nasser. He later became an Islamist. He later morphed into Pan-Africanist. But this was just part of his survival instinct.
Oh, really? That's how you read it?
Yeah, whatever goes for him, he moves. But
and did Gaddafi have, do you read that Gaddafi had a thirst for power, ultimate power, real power?
I think he was more inspired by the story of Umar Mukhtar. So he saw himself to be a new Umar Mukhtar in the making, that grand figure.
Yeah.
So that's why most of his messages were coming from the anti-imperialist approach. And the West obsession with Gaddafi actually stemmed from that aspect of his leadership. You know, he extended his influence as far as back in the IRA, Irish Republican Army, against Britain.
Yeah.
There was this Lockerbie bombing. So there was always been an attempt to get Gaddafi. So today what we have today is just the same division.
Okay, let's move on quickly.
Between the East and the West.
The West, okay.
So most of these actors are just faces of those divisions.
So who is this?
This is King Idris.
Oh, this King Idris, the famous one, the one Gaddafi overthrown. And who is this?
Now this is Aguila Saleh Issa. He's the Speaker of the Parliament in the East.
So there are 2 parliaments?
There were 2 parliaments initially, but now we have what do you call it, ostensibly government of national unity.
Okay, which is getting ready for the election.
Yeah. So what the UN process did was that it recognized the legitimacy of the Eastern Parliament, but also created an upper house, which is made up of members of the old parliament that refused to dissolve itself in Tripoli. That has a supervisory role. So now this is Aguila Issa. He's another contestant in the election.
For election, okay. Yeah. Is he from the East, from the West? Is he from Gaddafi?
He's from the East.
He's from the East, okay.
Yeah. And this is the current Prime Minister.
Okay, Abdul Hamid
Debeba. He actually promised not to contest, but recently saw his popularity rise and also opted to contest.
What is making his popularity rise?
You know, there was this recent expulsion of migrants where they were rounded up. And if you look at it, the timing itself has to do with the election. The Libyans also felt that, you know, unemployment is very rife in Libya. They felt that some of the locals were competing with them, and there was a bit of issue.
Is there a date for the election, by the way?
It's supposed to be on the 24th of December for the first round.
Are they running a parliamentary or presidential election?
Well, they're supposed to run 2 elections. One for the
Parliament,
and then
simultaneously on 24th
No,
December.
separately.
Which one is coming first?
The parliamentary election. But the goal is to transform Libya into a presidential system, because they felt that the parliamentary system that came after the
So why are they running a parliamentary election in December if they are intending to make it a presidential system?
Because of the divisions between the East and the West. Even as at now, the electoral law is still disputed.
So is there a potential that the United Nations might feel that we should split it into two countries? Are we there yet?
I think, no. If you look at the current system, everybody is afraid of partitioning state because that will create nationalist, irredentism. You know, there are even some states in Europe that even want to cede away from them. You can still remember the famous Catalan referendum that created chaos in Spain.
So you think the United Nations will not go for that?
They're very careful.
They'll stay for United Libya. Okay, so let's move on.
This is also another contender. And this is the famous Khalifa Haftar.
Who is he?
He's a former ally of Gaddafi. He was part of the unit that the commanders that were part of Gaddafi's attack, the war with Chad.
Yeah.
It seems along the way he fell out of favor and was captured with some weapons, and the Gaddafi had to sell him out. So he has always felt that Gaddafi betrayed him.
So by the time Gaddafi was dying, where was he?
By then he was outside the country.
Oh, he left. So he fled from Libya.
No, he fled from Libya. I know when they had a dispute with Gaddafi. But he came back and raised an army.
Wow.
We'll come to that. But you see, there was the division, this is Saif Islam al-Gaddafi. And people also fought him for coming in this attack. You remember the famous speech of Gaddafi when he was...
Yes. That's how he was dressed.
Yeah.
The speech he gave in Benghazi. And said...
in Tripoli, Zenga.
And called people cockroaches and all of that.
And people are faulting Saif Islam for appearing this way. But I think that's the most wisest decision he has ever done. You can't go to election without...
So this is how he's campaigning?
No, this is when...
This is the image of his campaign?
No, this is the first image you have of him so far publicly.
Oh, I see. Okay.
No, he hardly comes out.
Okay.
This is when he came to register himself for the election.
Okay.
But then that's the best decision he has taken ever. You can't contest, you can't go into an election without a secured base.
So he's making the Islamists his base?
No, this is just traditional Libyan dressing.
Okay, so what is his base?
This is meant to secure...
The Gaddafi people?
The Gaddafi people. We were expecting him to extend an olive branch. But if I don't have a secure base, why would I be talking to my opponent? I need to consolidate my position before I...
So who would be the Gaddafi people in Libya these days? The
Man,
members of the Green political party movement, the Green Revolution?
When they say the Green is quite diverse. You know, even within the Gaddafi clan, there were a lot of competition between Saif al-Islam and his brothers. But then you see, but because of the current division between the other actors, he has a better chance.
Okay. But are they still the single highest majority in terms of the single highest homogeneous group, the Gaddafi people? Are they identifiable? Because when you're going to an election, identification is very important.
You see, because of the post-Gaddafi suppression, they all laid low. It's just like the Afghan situation.
But are they many?
Yeah, there are many. Because if you look at the way the protest started in the West.
Okay.
No, yeah, in the West.
Yeah, and are they united?
That's why he's trying to
bring them together. Okay.
Secure his base. Then, so far, we don't know his plans for the country so far.
But the election, you said, is next month. Is this,
no, this month.
Is this month?
And
all this preliminary talk is still going on?
There's a call for even postponement of the election.
There should be, maybe.
By the High Council of State, which is the upper house of the current arrangement, which is made up of members of the old General National Congress that refused to dissolve itself. But then you see, out of these four actors, one, you don't have a definite electoral law. You don't have an independent, trusted institution to even define or settle the dispute. But then, out of this whole thing, Gaddafi is very popular. He looks more like a united, a consensus figure. But then I fear the actions of two men here, Khalifa Haftar and this guy. If you can remember, Khalifa Haftar offensive against the West was just a month prior to the election in 2019. What shows that if he loses, he wouldn't do the same. And then,
but why can't Saif Gaddafi talk to him? He knows him very well. He calls him uncle.
He sees himself as, he's also trying to get a piece of the pie.
Yeah, I know that.
Hasn't been a member of...
But the Gaddafi image is bigger than the image of Haftar.
No, but I see, now the current division is between the historic division between the East and the West. If the election does not allay the fear of Western domination of the country from the Easterners, then the result will be unacceptable by the East.
So he is from the East?
He's from the East. Now the question, part of the electoral law that was signed, or that was approved by the parliament in the East, allows him to, resign his current position in the Libyan National Army for 3 months, contest the election, in case he loses, come back to retain control of his
He's a member of the Libyan National Army.
His own self-styled Libyan. When the institution collapsed, one of the institutions that totally collapsed was the military. A series of armed wings, armed groups, Islamists, and after actually became popular cause, he promised to flush the east of Islamists. You see, the Sanusi order is an Islamic order, but it is a Sufi Islamic entity. And then because of the influence of Sanusiya order, the east does not share most Salafist ideologies that is dominant in the West. You remember?
So whilst they are all Islam, the philosophy is different.
The philosophy difference.
Is it rival? Is it contentious?
It's theoretical and theological differences.
And is it contentious?
Yeah, it's quite contentious that some of the things that the Sufis accept as part of the religion might be dispelled by the others. But then, that is one aspect. And then, don't forget, we have the foreign actors involved. Khalifa Haftar is believed to be backed by most Western powers.
Including Britain, France, Italy?
France, US.
Italy? Italy will be significant.
No, Italy sides with the West.
Okay, yeah.
And then you have Egypt. And then you have the government in the West being backed by Turkey, Qatar, and the likes.
So Saif is trying to build up from the West?
Saif Islam does not belong to any of the two factions.
Okay. But in terms of international support, where is your thinking? The geopolitics of it. Who is going to support Saif?
That is one issue. Everybody has ostracized Saif and attached him to his father. But you see, if you understand the Arab culture very well, family loyalty is very important because prior to the revolution, Saif Islam was a reformist member of the Gaddafi's regime. It was part of Saif's effort that led to the rapprochement between the Gaddafi regime and the Western countries.
Especially Tony Blair and Peter
likes.
Mandelson and all that.
So he was seen as a reformer, even by the Libyan people. The only mistake he did, if the Libyan people actually consider it as a mistake, was when he chose family loyalty over what they perceived. But then I still dispute the issue of that protest being nationwide. Because if you look at what happened in Bolivia, we were told Evo Morales was unpopular. The international media broadcasted images. He was overthrown through some constitutional gymnastics. You have Jeanine Áñez into office. 1 year later, election was conducted. The same party of Evo Morales won as in office today. So where lies the issue of Evo Morales?
So that sometimes the media, international media can put
and
this
if you look at the protests coming from the east, and then everybody going to side with the Easterners, not Gaddafi, tells you that you realize that this is the time to overthrow the man. And the West were quite opportunistic. And they learned a lesson that when state institutions collapse, there's chaos, and it will be hard to rebuild. So there's a connection between Libya and what is happening in Sudan and Ethiopia today.
We have to do that on Tuesday, unless you have something to add, because we have a 5-minute film we want to show to our viewers about Libya, so we can continue on Tuesday. But just give us one sentence of the link between Libya, Ethiopia, and Sudan.
It's about preserving state institutions. If you look at the coup in Sudan, the second coup that was conducted by Burhan, he actually overthrew the government, eased the forces for change out of power, reinstated the prime minister in a different capacity. He said he wanted to create a technocratic government, and now he has brought in, what was the prime minister's name? Hamdok, to power. In the capacity he wants him, and the international community is now trying to force the Sudanese people to accept that arrangement.
This is Sudan.
Yeah, that's Sudan.
This is North Sudan.
No, the Arab. The
regular Sudan.
No, the regular Sudan. But the fact they realize that the collapse of institutions, precisely the security forces in Libya, created the chaos. So why not let's just contain the evil that the military represents till we get to the transition in 2023 and whisk them out of office?
I see. So if Libya changes with this election, will that affect the policy towards Ethiopia and Sudan, assuming that Saif wins or assuming that Haftar wins?
It wouldn't necessarily affect that, but what they are trying to do, with the collapse of the Libyan institution, migration became an issue in Europe. It fueled illegal migration. So they were afraid of a collapse of state institution in Sudan and an influx
which will further
of
the migration.
So they accepted the coup as a necessary evil and not trying to force Hamdok and Burhan.
So who is running Libya's economy? The United Nations?
Both governments have counterclaims, and they've been exporting oil, and then...
Oh, they're exporting oil? Through the oil companies?
Yes, and then the Western companies, I don't even know how, whose side are they?
So oil trading is going on in Libya? Oil exports is going on in Libya?
It's going on.
Okay, that's interesting, and we do well as much as we can to bring you all of these details as part of our Good Evening Ghana presentation. Alhassan Bello, excellent guy. Tuesday he'll continue because of lack of time, but we did.